welcome back to the Jenks Island podcast, the only NFL podcast where you can get your takes from a washed-up Division III corner and his friends. I'm today's host, Ty McGee, filling in for Jenks, joined by my great friend and co-host, Sterb. In today's episode, we'll be breaking down the Super Bowl, some of the performances by this year's rookie class, and the final head coach hirings. First up, we're going to get into some of the Super Bowl picks for Sterb. Obviously, this is a weird episode, right? I don't think I've ever seen Jenks not be on an episode all the way back to Jenks and the Hammer. Let's get into it, Sterb. Let's hear your Super Bowl picks and analysis.
Yeah, we're just Island today, no Jenks. So you guys already gave your preview a little bit. I'll go over my little spiel here. So when the Patriots are on offense, like Drake May, as much as I love him, throughout the playoffs, he really hasn't played that well. He kind of needs to step it up. We saw the previous game versus Denver. It really felt like Vrabel was in his ear, like telling him not to throw the game away, not to lose. We saw him throw a ball away on like 3rd and 8 on their own 20 or whatever it was, and then just punt because the game conditions kind of just catered to that. And it ended up working. That game was kind of a coin flip, especially in the second half. If you're a Patriots fan, I don't know if I would be bragging about that one, especially against Jared Stidham. But yeah, May needs to kind of step it up here. And McDaniels, I think he's a creative play caller. He obviously has the experience in terms of calling plays in Super Bowls. But this Seahawks defense is kind of like another beast that you're going up against. And we've seen the Patriots struggle against elite defenses now, like against Houston is pretty poor. You caught lucky breaks there with, Drake and his teammates recovering some of his own fumbles, but I don't think you can expect to see that every game, you gotta eliminate those negative plays, and you gotta put up points against this Seattle defense because their offense is good as well. And then on Seahawks, when they have the ball, Kenneth Walker has been very, very good, and honestly, I think he needs to be good again. They kind of just need to keep Seattle in a positive game script and keep Sam Darnold from unraveling. He's been very, very good in these playoffs, but we've seen before that if he's kind of in his head a little bit, then it could not end up too pretty. So I think Kenneth Walker is going to be, pretty pivotal in this one. He's more of an explosive runner historically, but in this one, he kind of needs to have a high success rate, keep those chains moving, and keep Darnold in a favorable game script. For this one, I'm expecting kind of some longer drives, more drawn out, not necessarily a super low scoring game, but I'm expecting to see very methodical offense and pretty good defense down to down. But you got two pretty good quarterbacks in this game, so I'm going to enjoy watching it. But ultimately, I think I'm going to go Seahawks narrowly, probably 23-20. That's probably what I would arrive at. And then you guys gave your Super Bowl MVP. I'm going with a fun pick here. My two favorite players are in this game, and if I expect the Seahawks to win it, then I'm going Shaheed. Give me 2 return touchdowns or a long deep bomb, something like that. Is it gonna hit? No, probably not. But I'm gonna have fun betting on it. So
yeah, I brought that one up yesterday. I feel like this is Darnold or JSN's award to win if they win. But if Shaheed gets 2 punt returns or somehow scores 2 touchdowns that are pivotal in this game, he's really got a chance. Jenks and I talked about this a bit yesterday too. What has to go wrong for Seattle in order for New England to win? Because that's kind of how the vibe of this game feels, right? Seattle has to trip up somehow for them to lose this football game. And, we both kind of brought up Sam has to pretty much have a game where he did, in the middle half of the season where 4 turnovers, and their defense has to have probably as poor of a game as they did against the Rams. So it does seem like, it has to be worst case scenario. For you, what do you think it takes for the New England Patriots to win this game?
Yeah, you mentioned the performance against the Rams. I think the Rams are in you think this too. The Rams are in a different category of offense than the Patriots. I think they have probably pretty similar quarterbacks comparatively, but the supporting cast and play caller is just on a different level. It really just comes down to Darnold, and I have faith in him to not turn the ball over 4 times. Hopefully this doesn't get clipped out and it's Darnold turned the ball over 4 times, but I think he can do it. And I don't think he needs to play an A+ game in this one. I think his defense is good enough. It's kind of similar to, the Patriots Broncos game where it's Drake May knew that he didn't have to go out and win them the game. Obviously, you know, like on a different level in that one, because it's the Super Bowl and you're playing a healthy team on the other side in fair conditions in Santa Clara. But regardless, I don't think Darnold needs to play an A+ game. I think he needs to play, you know, kind of like a C+ game. I think gets away with a win in this one, or you feel pretty good about your chances at least. You mentioned like the Super Bowl MVP. I really just think unless it's like a random defensive player, and not random, but if a guy they have playmakers all up and down that Seattle defense. If one guy happens to make 2 big plays, then he could end up winning the Super Bowl MVP. It's very hard to predict that because all their players are like A- players, and the scheme is so good that like you can't individually pick out one player and say, oh, this guy can win Super Bowl MVP. Kind of similar to Malcolm Smith, another Seahawk that won Super Bowl MVP. But I really just think if Darnold throws a pick in like a key situation or throws 2 picks, like we've seen him do before, I think JSN is going to win it. I think it's that simple. Or if, you know, JSN gets 70% of the passing yards for Seattle, you know, it goes for 150 and 2 touchdowns. Like I think that's certainly in the cards. But Darnold just needs to not unravel this one, and I think they should be all right. And then like Drake May, like if he steps up to the level that I think he could, then he could threaten the Seattle defense. But I think Seattle's probably they've shown you more in this playoffs than Drake May has. So I have a little more faith in them being a good defense than I do Drake May, you know, like putting the actual threat on them and overtaking that level of defense.
Yeah. Next up, we're going to give some of our Super Bowl betting props, 3 of our just favorites from either side right now. You know, obviously, we've all picked Seattle at this point, so we're all kind of making ourselves clippable with some of the takes that we've given. But Sterb, give me some of your betting props that you love for this game.
So one that I actually just forgot about, I would go Drake May rushing yards. I'm pretty sure it's at like probably around like 34 or something like that. I'd probably take the over. Just because, you know, there's really no weaknesses in the Seattle defense, and that doesn't account for fumbles, that doesn't account for interceptions, and I think his receivers are going to be kind of covered. And whether he fumbles at the end of that scramble, he's getting those rushing yards regardless. So another one that I like is Travion Henderson, 50+ rush yards. That's plus 660 on DraftKings. We've seen him get that in one play multiple times this season. I don't think he's going to get a whole lot of work, but, you know, the value there is just like too good to pass up. Like if that hits 20% of the time, you're getting value on this. Another one that I like is JSN MVP. I know I just picked Shaheed, but I feel like that's good value there, plus 550. If Darnold throws, you know, 1 key pick or 2 picks, I think that's probably JSN's award to lose. And then another fun one, they have next gen stats props on DraftKings. Mac Hollins' longest air yards reception is plus 800. So if we see a Mac Hollins deep ball, we could see a Kayshon Boutte deep ball, whatever. Those guys are all kind of more favorable odds. I think Boutte's at like plus 300 for this. But if we see like a Mac Hollins like 50-yard bomb that kind of amounts to like nothing, or like a field goal, which we've seen quite a lot over the past 2 years, whether he's on Buffalo or whether he's on New England, that's plus 800. So I feel pretty good about that. It just in terms of value there. But Ty, what you got?
Yeah, the next gen stats ones are fun. You know, before we get on, Sterb and I were talking back when the Chiefs were playing the Eagles, and it was kind of that blowout Super Bowl. I bet Xavier Worthy to have the fastest, you know, I think it was fastest miles per hour or whatever the exact next gen stat is, and he got it on that late bomb touchdown that he just, you know, took off, and it didn't mean anything. It was garbage time touchdown, but you know, that's an opportunity for Mac Hollins. If there's some garbage time there, he catches a deep ball. But for me, I went with 3 a little bit safer ones that I think you'd probably parlay because together they make a lot more sense. I went with Drake May under passing yards. I think I like the over rushing yards and the under passing yards. His line's at 220.5, which is, you know, minus 11 or minus 111 on DraftKings. He's only surpassed this against the Chargers. Seattle lets up, you know, about 200 passing yards per game during the season. You know, we saw them stymie the San Francisco 49ers offense in the passing game. Brock Purdy only had 140 yards. Obviously, then the Rams, you know, but the Rams are kind of on a different level, total, you know, as a total offense, like we talked about. So I like the under there. JSN anytime, right? It's minus 110. He scored in every single playoff game so far. Even the blowout when, he didn't play that much time. He had 3 catches, 18 yards, and like a touchdown in that game. So, I like that one. And then Trevion Henderson, I went with a bit of a safer route than you did, right? I think you took 50 plus rushing yards. I went over 18 and a half. In this postseason, you saw against Denver, he wasn't utilized that much. I think that was a bit more, game script with the weather. They wanted more of a between the tackles, downhill kind of back. You saw Denver didn't have that RJ Harvey, a more comparable back to Trevion Henderson, and it wasn't working out well for them. So I think that was script. But when you go back to the games against Houston and the Chargers, he had at least 20 rushing yards in both those games. So that's minus 112. So you parlay that together, it's 575. It's 10 to win 67.50, right? It's nothing sexy, but it's, a bet that I feel pretty comfortable with. I'm going to ride it for sure.
Puts food on the table.
Yeah, put some food on the table, get you your 30-pack of beer. It's just a safe one that, has plus odds.
Beer, $67?
I know, you get food in.
Where you live? What kind of beer are you getting?
Listen, hey, your California prices, it might be $67.50 out there.
It's close to me.
It's I like it overall. It's nothing too crazy, but it's a safe one. And listen, if we're talking Gatorade, give me orange. I don't care what the odds are on it. I just like orange. And give me tails. Tails never fails. Next up, we're going to get into Sterb's next-gen stats. Say that again.
I agree with both of those.
Good stuff. Next up, we're going to get into Sterb's next-gen stats. Sterb is a huge advanced statistics guy. I'm kind of anti-advanced statistics, and there's been feuds all year long in the group chat over the advanced stats, but obviously they're a thing for a reason, and then they're very accurate. So Sterb's going to give us 2 next-gen stats for each team. So let's hear it.
Yeah, I think analytics gets a bad rap because people try to apply it without really understanding what it means, which is why I kind of push back on a lot of the analytics movement. But I do embrace, kind of showing things with context. Like if you watch something and then you go look at an advanced statistic and it kind of matches what you see, then it's like, okay, that makes sense. But there's context needed for every single number that you will ever look at, whether it's passing yards, EPA, whatever, because it doesn't account for everything. I'll give like a little spiel over the offseason about analytics, I think. But I did 2 of these for each side of the ball. When you mentioned Drake May's legs came up huge in that Denver game. 3.5 total rush EPA for him. And it's been a big part of their offense. And I think that's kind of due to a lack of talent in the weapons room. I think you got like a lot of C+, C- level players there. I don't think New England really belongs in terms of like building out or a built out offensive roster. And when you're going up against Seattle defense, there's no weak links. So I think it's going to be a lot on Drake May to scramble here. But the problem is Seattle, they're the number 1 playoff defense in allowing the lowest amount of EPA per scramble to quarterbacks by quite a bit of a margin. I think they're at like 0.26, which if you're familiar with EPA, 0.26 is actually pretty high. But that's due to a lot of quarterbacks scrambling for first downs on third down. Scrambles are very, very key, very pivotal plays, which is why we see a higher EPA in them than most other plays. But it's a pretty wide gap in terms of how good Seattle is at limiting scrambles and making those negative plays for opposing offenses. So I think that's like a bit of a tough matchup for Drake, but I do think he'll be able to kind of outrun and make some key pivotal plays, maybe pick up a first down on 3rd and 8, something like that. And then another thing I looked at, just like watching New England throughout this year, I feel like they've been very, very up and down in the red zone. They average 4.85 points per red zone drive. So that means like on the drives where they enter the red zone, they take at least 1 snap in the red zone. They average 4.85 points, including that accounts for field goals, touchdowns, everything. And their red zone touchdown percentage, which is the amount of drives that result in a touchdown that have entered the red zone previously, is 59.7%. League average is like 56. For how elite of an offense that they were statistically during the regular season, 59.7 is actually a little low. If you remember, there was this like kind of weird goal line sequence where they essentially like I think they took a knee. This was like week 5. They took a knee and then to like run out some clock, and then they kind of got bailed out on 4th down to like a back pylon touchdown to like Diggs or whatever. I think there's a lot of weird stuff in the red zone with the Patriots, and that could be like Vrabel and McDaniels trying to get like a little too cute, especially considering that they don't have a super good separator at this point. You get your best separator on the goal line is probably Diggs, and he's pretty old coming off of a major injury. So I think like this red zone offense, especially against the Seattle defense, their red zone touchdown percentage that they allow is 49.1. I think that's like 7th in the NFL. So it's super, super good. And they allowed 3 touchdowns on 4 red zone drives versus LA. Again, kind of different tier of offense, but they didn't even allow San Francisco to take a single snap in their red zone in that San Francisco game, which is a crazy stat. I looked at like a drive visualizer, and they just all stop at like the 40 or 30 yard line. It was hilarious. And then when Seattle has the ball, you just got to keep the Patriots from being effective with the blitz. Darnold has half of his picks versus the blitz this year in the regular season, which is 7. That's not great. The Patriots, although against like pretty terrible offensive lines, if we're putting it lightly, their blitzing has been like super, super effective throughout the playoffs. And Seattle's offensive line is fine. I think it's like a B- B level unit, kind of across the board. They got some good players. Grace Able is a standout. But you got to keep Darnold in a positive game script, and that kind of goes into my second point. Seattle on play action this year, Darnold is an absolute demon on play action. He has 0.41 EPA per dropback, which is 1st in the league, tied with Lamar, and everyone else is kind of not that close. 14 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. Darnold without play action, negative 0.07 EPA per dropback, which ranks 23rd, 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. So when he doesn't have the threat of the run, it kind of gets not that pretty. And Seattle's been able to, kind of get away with the threat of the run, even though they haven't been that efficient of a rushing offense this entire year. But when you're going up against Mike Vrabel in a single game format, I think he's going to kind of key in on that and, force you into non-play action situations if he can help it. Because we've seen Darnold, kind of be not that great without the threat of the play action. And not to mention, again, a later schedule for New England in this season, but they were the 6th best opposing defense versus play action. So if they can force them into non-play action plays, Darnold, it might not get that pretty. So I think like scoring first and scoring quick is going to be pretty important in this game, especially on this side of the ball, because Kenneth Walker, if he can rush out the clock and get Seattle into halftime with a 3-point lead, I think that's kind of game over for the Patriots. And because Drake May, as much as I love him, this is a very, very hard defense to come back against. So that was kind of a look at like some key pivotal things that I'm watching in this game. But basically, the takeaway from that is like Drake May, his scrambling might be mitigated in this game in terms of its effectiveness. I think he'll get there just based on volume. But Seattle, like they gotta stay ahead of the chains. Got to keep that play action threat alive.
Yeah, I love the point about the red zone because you really saw, that kind of come up in the Denver game, right? They get into a 4th and 1 situation and they got the first down on that play. You look at it replay wise, maybe didn't get it, but it led to a field goal, but still like risky call, right? You got to kind of take your points when you can. And you saw Denver and you saw Denver on the other end not take their points, and that ultimately is what lost them the game. So red zone efficiency has just been something that's talked about a lot more in the modern NFL, and it really is so key because points win games, especially in big games like these in the Super Bowl. Next up, we're going to just talk about our most memorable Super Bowl moments. I'll say this too, right before we jump into that. Sterb's Next Gen Stats is something that we're thinking about adding into next year's rotation weekly as a segment. So if you guys like it, if you guys are analytics darlings and you love the stats, you're stats nerds like Sterb, Let us know. Let us know in the comments. Let us know if
also if you got a good name for it.
Right. If you got a good name for it, if there's a specific statistic that you want us to kind of highlight or dig into, for sure, let us know. But next we'll get into our most memorable Super Bowl moment. For me, I'm going to go back to 2015 and the Denver Broncos Super Bowl. Right. Obviously, it's close to home with it being my team, but the Von Miller strip sack about 6 minutes, left in the first quarter. It's the first strip sack, not that second one where he kind of reached out and tipped it out. And he just absolutely blows by their the Panthers' right tackle, comes in, just snatches the ball, almost looks like he's taking a handoff from Cam Newton the way that he grabs it out, almost gets it himself and would have ran in for a touchdown. The ball flies out. Malik Jackson lands on it in the end zone. Denver goes up 10-0 at that point, and you could feel just the momentum shift in that stadium in Santa Clara. The host of this year's Super Bowl. You just felt the momentum shift, right? Denver goes up 10-0. The defense is balling. You knew that your offense is going to be a little bit more pedestrian in this game. So the defense scoring was a huge win for them. And Carolina only ended up scoring 10 points in that game. So, that was a huge play. And then obviously the fumble earlier on. But I just remember being a 15-year-old kid with my parents freaking out when Von Miller blows by that tackle and rips that ball out, because that was, that was the Von Miller staple, was just, the tomahawk chop. And I kind of talked about, Nick Bonito, if he could do that, and he did this postseason. So, that is something that will live in my head forever. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I started watching football probably around like 2013. So like I missed out on a few of the key Saints moments as being a Saints fan. But like for me, when I go back and watch, like obviously the Tracy Porter pick six and then the onside recovery in the Saints Super Bowl, like those are moments that stand out to me. Just like some more recent ones, like David Tyree, obviously you got to mention that one. Malcolm Butler at the goal line, that's probably going to come up a lot this week. And then some other ones like from past Super Bowls that I've rewatched. That Cardinals Steelers Super Bowl was kind of filled with awesome moments, like the San Antonio Holmes catch, James Harrison 100-yard pick six. I thought you were going to mention the Elway copter, if I had to be honest. Obviously, we weren't alive for that, but
yeah,
it's an awesome moment. And then Philly special as well in 2017. Like,
yeah, the
doesn't get
Elway
much better
copter.
than that.
The Philly special is obviously huge, right? Because a lot of teams ended up adopting that play. We still see it in the modern NFL. The Elway copter, obviously, that's a huge one, right? I was just watching the Elway documentary a couple weeks ago, and that comes up as obviously a huge play. You think about Terrell Davis with the migraines, that's another one for me where Mike Shanahan. The mic'd up on that one's awesome, because Mike Shanahan sends him out there and he's like, I can't see, he's having dealing with migraines. He's like, you don't need to see. We're not giving you the ball. And he just sends him back out there. They run a play action pass. And that's an awesome one. I think 2015 is just, getting to, grow up as a kid, being a Broncos fan, right? They were good teams, but then, wasn't alive for the Elway. And then we get Peyton Manning, right? And it's so awesome. You got the heartbreak in 2013, though. And then, it's like, this is his last ride. Like, we got to win the Super Bowl here. And then your defense goes out of balls. And as a defensive guy too, right? I'm a former linebacker. So, anytime you can force some turnovers, that's awesome. But
and against Cam Newton too, like,
right.
We kind of grew up on Cam Newton. I think Cam Newton gets very, very disrespected when I'm looking at NFL conversations these days. The Jalen Hurts is nowhere close to Cam Newton. And I remember that 2015 year. Like if you got a Cam Newton jersey, didn't matter where you were from, didn't matter what team you were a fan of. If you got that jersey for Christmas, you're like the coolest kid in school.
Oh yeah. I mean, the end of his career was a little bit of a fall off, but I think the biggest tarnish on his legacy is that Super Bowl, right? And he still gets asked that question all the time. What happened when you started that fumble? And he's just like, I froze. I didn't, I was scared. And that's kind of the tarnish on his reputation. But I like the Malcolm Butler one, because we're going to hear that a ton. Anytime that Seattle gets on the goal line, and if they don't run the damn football with Kenneth Walker, you're going to hear it.
Did you see the clip of Sam Darnold saying like, if it's like second and something at the one, some like fan or reporter gave him a situation, he's like, I'd probably throw. I know it's a sore subject. Yeah.
Damn. Yeah. I mean, listen, you got JSN on the outside. I know he's an elite separator, but with the history around the Super Bowl, you got to run the damn ball there. But yeah, those are some.
I forget the specific I forget the specific situation that the reporter asked, but I kind of agreed with him there. I remember saying like, because they didn't have any timeouts left, and it
Yeah.
was like I think it was second or third down at the one. Um, but it kind of makes sense to stop the clock because it's hard to get your lineman back up.
Yeah, I think
I don't
I
think it
think
was the
in the
exact same situation as the Malcolm Butler.
I think the Malcolm Butler one, I think they had a timeout. There was like a decent amount of time left, so they
Yeah,
could have stopped
I
the
think so as
clock.
well.
So yeah, I could see it there. But good Super Bowl memories overall. Next up, we're going to get into the last two head coach hirings. Obviously, a couple weeks ago, Jenks and I covered the majority of the head coach hirings. There were still two left open with Vegas and the Cardinals. We kind of had some, key in on who the Vegas head coach is going to be. The Cardinals one was very up in the air. I don't even know if this guy was Mike LaFleur was listed as some of the final candidates. But Sterb, give me your thoughts on Klint Kubiak and Mike LaFleur as the head coaches for the Las Vegas Raiders and the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, so I'll start with Klint Kubiak. Obviously, as a Saints fan, I'm a little bit familiar with him. I think he's very good schematically, and I think in kind of every stop that he's been in, you've seen that. Um, he doesn't jump off the page to me as like a leader of men type. Like I don't know how his coaching personality is going to be. Like press conferences or something that's not that important to me. But what's really more important is how he deals with the locker room, and it's something that as fans we don't really have access to, but it's a massive variable, and he just seems like a kind of quiet, kind of reserved kind of guy. So I think like getting like a more animated and like leader of men kind of defensive coordinator might be like a good thing to get for this Raiders team. Obviously, like you're kind of starting to turn it around. Everyone expects you to take Mendoza. You got be in the ear of the organization. So I think they will hire like a pretty good defensive coordinator, and I don't have a lot of concerns with Kubiak being like this crazy sort of guy that's like doing weird stuff like Antonio Pierce or like Chip Kelly calling plays that don't exist, anything like that. I think he's just like a very not set in his ways, but uh, kind of stoic a little bit and like just more reserved, very process driven. But it's just kind of like whatever to me. Like he's a good offensive coordinator clearly, but I really have no idea how he's going to be, handling and leading a team. Yeah.
Yeah. What about Mike LaFleur? What do you think about that one?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think anyone has any idea on Mike LaFleur. I think he was the Jets OC back in 2022, I believe, and Garrett Wilson like said something about him. He's like, "Oh yeah, he's probably the best DC or OC that I've had." Looking back at it, but that's not really that high of a bar for the Jets. So I don't know. I mean, he's obviously got the last name. He's in that. It kind of just feels like we're grasping at the last straws of this Shanahan, McVay, LaFleur, a whole sort of thing. Kubiak. We'll see if these are fruitful coaching hires, but I really lean no particular way with LaFleur at all.
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot. We've seen a lot of success from that. Mike Shanahan tree dating all the way back, obviously with Denver with Gary Kubiak, but then in Washington with a lot of these coaches that are around the league and are considered kind of in that McVay tree, but ultimately they are in the Mike Shanahan tree. Klint for me, he reminds me a lot of Gary. Gary was not the most boisterous leader of men guy like a Dan Campbell, but he was just a smart offensive mind. He was kind of the yin and the yang with Mike Shanahan and John Elway back in the day, where there were more boisterous personalities, and he was more the reserved kind of guy. So yeah, it doesn't jump off the page as like, oh yeah, this is like the guy. But I think Clint's going to have a lot of success there. Staff, like you mentioned, is going to be important. He does have a possibility of hiring some good defensive guys out of that Mike Macdonald tree. Maybe a guy like Zach Orr, who is with Mike Macdonald in Baltimore, maybe someone from the Seattle tree right now. But I think it's like a hire. I think it's a good hire for those fantasy stock of Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty, and the development of Fernando Mendoza. But I got to see what they do around the rest of those guys, right? Defense, they're going to lose Max Crosby most likely. Doesn't want to play there. Outside of Max Crosby, that defense is pretty horrendous, and they lack a lot of talent on the offensive line and the wide receiver position. So they definitely need to go into this offseason and spend some money. They have the money to spend, but I think it's at least a good starting point, and I don't imagine them having a ton of success in year one, but I think there's something they can build on, especially with the Chiefs starting to fall off a little bit. With the Chargers, being the Chargers, they just always end up flopping something some way or the other. So I think there's an opportunity in the AFC West, but yeah, I want to see what defensively they do. And then Mike LaFleur, I think it's a good hire. I graded it a B because we don't know too much about LaFleur, but again, we know the tree. I think, again, staff does matter. And I don't love the offensive coordinator that they brought in. They brought in Nathaniel Hackett, who failed Denver Broncos head coach. I know he was the first OC for his brother Matt in Green Bay. And, maybe there is some the family connection there, just the comfortability. And he is a veteran guy. And, if he's not calling plays, maybe he's just like kind of in your ear. Sean Payton's had that, right, with Pete Carmichael in Denver and some of those guys. But it's the team isn't inspiring, right? He's heading into a worse situation than the Raiders have, which is saying a lot. They're going to lose Kyler Murray. They had one of the worst defenses in the NFL this past year. They don't have a ton of cap. They got $40 million. There's room for growth with depending on how they get rid of Kyler. If they trade him, it's better than cutting him, but they still end up with some dead cap. So I think it's a far more important team composition at this point, right? The job that the GM does more so than Mike LaFleur at this point. This is the type of guy that, maybe fails in Arizona and has some success somewhere else. Cause again, I believe in that Shanahan tree, but they didn't have many great options either. I mean, they were looking at Raheem Morris. They were looking at Campanelli, who said he was going to stay. They kind of looked over Vance Joseph for whatever reason.
Yeah, no one really wanted that job.
Yeah. A lot of people had withdrawn from it or just not given interest to it. So,
yeah.
I like the Kubiak hire. I don't love, I like the LaFleur hire, but I don't love the team that either of them is stepping into. And that's probably why they ended up being the last jobs filled. So anything else on the head coach hirings?
Not really. I mean, it's just considering where they were at and considering what they were working with. I think these are two pretty all right hires, but it doesn't inspire a whole lot of confidence in me, I'd say.
Yeah, uninspiring locations for sure. Anywho, the last topic that we're going to get into is our rookie review. We're going to highlight a couple rookies that had a lot of success this past year, either were underwhelming, and then we're going to highlight a class that was really impressive to us. For me, the two guys that, impressed me the most, just based on where they were picked, one is James Pierce Jr. He was picked at 26. I kind of gave this an A- grade. Because he led rookies with sacks with 10.5 sacks. And it's so hard to find an elite edge rusher, especially in the 20s. A lot of these guys go at the upper echelon in the draft, right? And this most sacks since Micah Parsons in 2021, right? The only guy with double-digit sacks since Micah Parsons in 2021. And then dating before that, there's not a lot of guys that had as many sacks as this guy did. And he kind of, helped change the Atlanta defense with some of the help of the other rookies around him, Xavier Watts, Jalen Walker. And I think that they're in such a good situation, going forward under Kevin Stefanski with Jeff Ulbrich maintaining as the DC, right? Obviously it did suck. They did trade away pick 13. But, this is a team that's ultimately a quarterback away, has some cap space, has the ability to maybe get out of the Kirk Cousins contract, and hired one of the better head coaches on the market, brought in a guy like Matt Ryan. So, I'm fine with them getting rid of pick 13 because pick 13, if it was a top 10 pick at one point in time, which it was, that's hard. That's really hard to lose that. But 13, I mean, look, last year, I think pick 13 with Kenneth Grant, he was all right. So it's kind of a crapshoot when you get to that point. But not having a first obviously does suck. And the other guy was Jaxson Dart, picked right before James Pierce, another trade-up situation, a situation where they didn't have to give up a first-round pick, though, in 2026. I gave this another A- grade. Obviously availability is the best ability, and he has been banged up a lot. But when healthy, he thrived without his RB1, without his wide receiver one for majority of the season. He went out, he beat a Philly team, he beat a Chargers team, and nearly beat a Denver team if his defense didn't blow that opportunity. And he attracted a big-name head coach at the end of the day, John Harbaugh, who has the ability to transform this organization. And I think that's probably the biggest accomplishment that Jaxson Dart had in year one is, he played so well that he inspired the best head coach candidate on the market to come join him. The other guy that I want to highlight as kind of my, disappointing pick was Travis Hunter. Obviously, dealt with some injuries. At pick 2, though, they did trade up for him, did have to trade a 2026 first for him as well. Kind of a C grade because he wasn't terrible. And we knew it would take some time to get him acclimated to playing both sides of the ball. But, you saw this team take off without him. And that's a little concerning, right? We'll see this coming year when he comes back. Is there continuity? Was it just taking time for Liam Cohen to get this group going? Or was it an addition by subtraction because, they were off because he's in defensive meetings when they're talking about offensive stuff and vice versa. We talked about that all off season long being possibly an issue, right? Where, meeting rooms meet at the same time and he's trying to have to split time. I believe in him as the athlete, but the mental part of it all is definitely tough, especially coming as a rookie. So, having traded a 26 first, take him at pick 2, all the hype around him, and then excelling so much without him, it's a knock for me, but I think he still has the potential. And then last but not least, the best class for me is by far the Cleveland Browns class. I graded this an A+ because they acquired a 2026 first from the Jacksonville trade, trading back from 2 to 5 and passing on Travis Hunter, taking Mason Graham, who started off slow but finished the season pretty strong in November, December. You saw that defense really take off, win them a couple football games or get them in football games with really good teams despite poor quarterback play, which we will ignore the fact that their quarterbacks were terrible that they drafted, but they were 3rd and 5th round picks. So
they had 2 Pro Bowlers, man. What are you talking about?
Yeah, they had 2 Pro Bowlers, right? Yeah. Outside of Mason Graham, though, Harold Fannin flashed the ability to be a top 10 tight end. Quinshon Judkins has top 10 running back potential in this Todd Monken offense. We saw how much they run the football in Baltimore. It's probably going to be a lot of the same here in Cleveland. And then Dylan Sampson, who provided a change of pace, looked very well, looked very good prior to Judkins' return. Obviously, post Judkins' injury, didn't, kind of match that production, but the early season production was there. Carson Schwarzenegger is the decoy favorite, and Isaiah Bond, a guy who they added as UDFA, flashed some potential as well. So, top to bottom, this class was awesome, whether it's the guys they drafted, the guys they got as undrafted free agents. And then obviously the quarterbacks, they weren't great, but they were serviceable options to get them into the future, right? I imagine that they add a quarterback this offseason. Monken has, shown some tendency to, or, he's tentative to say, oh, Shedeur Sanders is going to have a chance at this job. It seems like he won't. Maybe they'll go out and get a Malik Willis or a Ty Simpson, but top to bottom, this class was awesome. So I love James Pierce. I love Jaxson Dart. Travis Hunter was disappointing, and the Cleveland Browns draft class was awesome. What do you got?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on Travis Hunter. It's especially interesting because we saw this team, thrive after he was gone, but thrive particularly in the wide receiver room. That's a very crowded wide receiver room that he's stepping back into now, and you gotta kind of wonder if they're seeing that in Parker Washington's a stud, Jacoby Myers is a stud, super reliable guys. Where it's you kind of think that they're going to use them 80% on defense and then mix in a few plays on offense. So this kind of may give them a more clear direction. But I'm super intrigued to see that one next year. For my best picks, I would have to go with obviously Tetero McMillan, a guy I was super high on coming into the year. And I think a lot of the pre-draft stuff that we were hearing was probably teams picking probably 9th to 14th and trying to get his draft stock to tank a little bit. We saw that video of him freshman year saying oh, I don't watch film on my free time. I just watch it, when we all watch it together. That was the weirdest thing. He was eating rice in the cafeteria as a freshman, as an 18-year-old. And I was supposed to believe that was going to translate to anything in the NFL. Obviously, a super, super good player. We're talking about mainly first rounders here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Tyler Shough for a second. Obviously picked at 40. Wasn't a super, super inspiring pick at the time. I was okay. It kind of just felt like another, kind of meh move by the Saints, Kellen Moore, signing Derek Carr. It just felt like another, okay, I guess I got to support this now. But he's played super, super well over the past over the second half of the season. I liked Rattler as well. I thought he was playing a little bit better than he was getting credit for. And I thought that, Shough, if he wasn't able to beat him out in training camp and in practice, then he probably shouldn't be playing. That was clearly wrong. And he's, arguably, some people have him as the best rookie quarterback right now. I don't know if I believe that yet. I'd probably still take Cam Ward over him if I was picking today. I don't know about Dart. I think they're on, similar tiers, but I'd probably lean Chuck. But it's about as good as you can ask for going into year 2 for a new head coach and getting your quarterback at least for the next year, you'd hope. At 40 is like really a positive sign in turning around the Saints franchise. I'll go to a bad one now. Shamar Stewart. I mean, it's just not translating. Obviously, like an athletic specimen. Probably the most athletic edge rusher that we've seen come out of the draft since like Myles Garrett. But the big knock on him was sack production. I think he had like 4.5 sacks or 4 sacks in his final year. And it's not even that. It's like the athleticism isn't really even showing up. I don't know if it's a preparation thing. I don't know if it's an IQ thing, but it's just not working for Shamar Stewart. And it could be like a bad situation thing, but I'm more inclined to say that pretty much everyone on the Bengals defense sucks rather than it being like a situational thing there that, there may be a couple diamonds in the rough besides DJ Turner. DJ Turner's very good. Another good pick. Let's see. I'm deciding here between. I think Jahad Campbell is really good. Josh Simmons. I probably shout him out even though he didn't play the whole year. But I'll go with Grace Abel here. I talked about him a little earlier. He was kind of like the final piece that this Seahawks offensive line needed. Although Jalen Sundell, actually Grace Abel's college teammate, who's a UDFA, ended up being camp stud for them, and he's starting for them now. But those two guys were kind of like the last pieces that this offense needed to, get the line to kind of like what I said, like a B- level overall. And there's not really one specific weak point on the offensive line, which I think is a good way to build out a unit like offensive line where, if there's one weak point as a defense, you can pick your spots. So you can attack that over and over and over again. But just like dropping Grace Abel in, I feel like was very, very pivotal to this Seahawks offense. And should we talk about Colston Loveland, Ty?
Jenks might fire us if we talk about Colston Loveland.
Yeah, this episode might not be going up.
Jenks still to this day, in the pre-draft process and to this day, believes that Colston Loveland was not worth a first-round pick. He tries to argue that, it's part of value and how he values tight ends, but he then believes that Tyler Warren and Brock Bowers should have been first. So I said to him, unless you're an all-pro, you're not worth a first-round pick in Jenks' book. So let's talk about Colston Loveland.
He also said that his production in this offense could have been replaced by the likes of Isaiah Lakely and TJ Hawkinson this year.
Yeah, that was tough.
Yikes.
Not great.
Well, he's really, really good. Newsflash. I don't know if anyone's heard of this Colston Loveland guy. What did he have, like 150 receiving yards in their playoff game? Yeah, he's pretty good. He's actually like a very solid blocker. I would say an above average blocker. That was kind of something he got knocked for in the pre-draft process a little bit.
I'll say this. I don't understand at all why he got knocked for that. He played at a heavy run team in Michigan, right? Like that team runs the ball.
He wasn't asked to do it a whole lot either.
It wasn't asked to, but obviously, he's not going to be the starting tight end on a club that, runs the ball all the time if he can't block. Like obviously there were some traits there and the ability to do so.
And he's clearly he's very, very well built and very, very strong. And he's also, I think he was like 20 on draft night, 20 or 21. He's like almost a year younger than me to a date. Like he's like 366 days younger than me, which is crazy. But like this guy, I don't know, clearly very talented. There were no really holes in his tape. You could say that, it was a little middling, but given the situation that we just described, I think it's more than fair for him to be, the number one option on a national championship team and see like, hey, this guy may not be doing anything like making one-hand catches or, blowing up guys off the ball, but he's solid. He finds a way to contribute, and he's just pretty much as reliable as it gets. And we see that translate to the NFL now where, you get Ben Johnson, you get a better quarterback in Caleb Williams now, and he looks a lot better. But I would probably take Colston Love. If we were to redraft, I'd still take him top 10. And I don't think that's that crazy to say. He's probably like a top 6 to 7. Didn't do that on purpose. Top 6 to 7 tight end in the league, like probably today. And he's young. He's super young. So some guys, like positional value, it's true for a lot of guys at the tight end position. But if you have like a top 10 guy, it kind of says like it does a whole lot for your offense. Like you can't just say Trey McBride's not that valuable because he's a tight end. Trey McBride can be a number one on a good playoff level offense, and I truly believe that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, receiving tight ends, finding tight ends that can, be so dynamic in the pass game, they are hard to come by. So, you can find blocking tight ends anywhere, right? You find the guy that played at North Dakota or North Dakota State, and he will be able to, come in on third down and 3rd and 1, and he'll be able to block for you. But finding
Jackson
a guy
Halls.
that can separate, Jackson Halls, but finding a guy that can separate like a Colson Loveland, that is so valuable. So I think that's what separates him as one of those first-round value tight ends. Did you have any teams that really stood out from you for the rookie review?
Yeah, obviously Cleveland, and then kind of the 4 that stood out to me were like Seattle's class. I thought was really good, top to bottom. Obviously, they had some injuries with like Torrey Horton, and I don't think Elijah Arroyo played the whole year. Carolina stood out to me as well with Tedero McMillan. I kind of mentioned that already. We got Nick Scorton, Jimmy Horn Jr., a fun gadget player throughout some of the games this year. But like Chicago, you got a starting tackle in the second or third round in Ozzie Trapillo. You got Colson Loveland. You got Luther Burden, who arguably might be like a top 2 wide receiver in this class, depending on who you ask. You got Kyle Monungai in the 7th. The only like stain on Chicago, I would say, is like Ruben Hippolyte. I remember watching the draft tracker, and that was like the only name up until that point I had never seen. I was like, there's no way this is a real player, like Ruben Hippolyte III. But overall, these 4 classes are very good. I probably lean Cleveland as the best, even though like these 4, kind of stand out in a tier of their own.
Yeah, I love the Chicago one, right? Because a lot of those young guys really did propel this team. Trapillo was a guy that we didn't know what he was going to be, comes in, steps up. Loveland obviously ascends in the latter half of the season. And Burden, I think, is a guy that, if they can give him more targets by getting rid of DJ Moore, a guy who kind of doesn't provide much for that offense, he can be a true problem. And I don't know if you remember this, but early on in the offseason, Kyle Monungai, there was clips of him moving over bags, and people were saying that he moved like a grandpa and that he might not make the roster because he was a 7th-round pick. It was going to be hard if he couldn't move well. And then, I was on him from the beginning. I took him in my dynasty league, and I was like, this is going to be a guy. Maybe they cut DeAndre Swift as a camp casualty. I think I said that on the pod. And he obviously showed out. Didn't even really get that many carries until the second half of the season and finished with 700 yards. So that is an awesome class that almost propelled them to an NFC Championship game. But any other closing thoughts for this episode? I know, again, a weird one without Jenks, but I think we covered a lot of good things that you guys will be interested in, and Jenks will be back next week. We'll maybe even do a 2-episode thing if Sterb and Jenks can't figure out how to merge their schedules.
It's like the 8th week in a row now.
Right,
Jenks and I have had the opposite schedule.
Any closing thoughts?
I'm super excited for sorry, go ahead.
No, just any closing thoughts?
Yeah, super excited for the Super Bowl, obviously, and then we're coming up into draft season, which is, as everyone knows, the best season, especially for Saints fans. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So super
Yeah,
excited.
Make sure you tune into yesterday's episode. Jenks and I went a little bit more in depth on all things Super Bowl. Well, at least I went more in depth than I did in this episode, where I kind of let Sterb have his time to shine with his Super Bowl analysis. And keep an eye out for the upcoming weeks. We're starting to get into draft stuff, like Sterb mentioned. We'll try to pair it up so that we can get into every position week by week leading up to the draft. So I think we'll probably start coming up next week. But like I said, make sure you check out that episode. Keep an eye out for us. And thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Jenks Island Podcast.